The desert heat pressed against Marcus Rivera's face like a furnace as he crouched behind the crumbling wall of what used to be a marketplace. His hands moved with practiced precision, checking his medical kit one more time. 23 years old, 5 years in the Navy SEALs, and 2 deployments deep into this godforsaken corner of Afghanistan. Marcus had seen enough blood and chaos to fill several lifetimes. The radio crackled in his ear. Medic needed at grid reference 77 Alpha. Multiple casualties. Move fast, Doc. Marcus grabbed his gear and sprinted through the narrow alleyways, his boots kicking up clouds of dust that caught in his throat. The sound of gunfire echoed off the concrete walls around him, but he had learned to tune it out. His focus was singular. Get to the wounded, keep them alive, bring them home. When he reached the coordinates, the scene was worse than he expected. 3 Marines lay scattered across the courtyard of a bombed-out building. 2 were conscious, 1 was not. Marcus went to work immediately, his training taking over like muscle memory. The first Marine had a through-and-through bullet wound in his shoulder, painful but not life-threatening. The second had shrapnel embedded in his leg, bleeding heavily but manageable. It was the third one that made Marcus's heart skip a beat. She was unconscious, lying face down in a pool of blood that was growing larger by the second. Her uniform was torn and dirty, but as Marcus rolled her over to assess her injuries, something caught his eye that made him freeze completely. There, sewn onto her torn jacket, was an insignia he recognized immediately. 3 small silver stars arranged in a triangle pattern with a small anchor beneath them. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the sounds of battle around him seemed to fade away completely. Marcus had seen that insignia only once before in his life. 12 years ago, when he was just 11 years old, it had been sewn onto his mother's dress uniform, the one she wore in the photograph that sat on his nightstand back home in San Diego. The same photograph he looked at every night before sleeping. The only image he had left of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rivera, who had died in a helicopter crash when Marcus was in 6th grade. But that was impossible. His mother had been Navy, and this was clearly a Marine uniform. The insignia didn't belong there. It didn't make sense. Marines didn't wear Navy rank insignia, especially not ones that had been discontinued years ago. The wounded Marine coughed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth, and Marcus snapped back to reality. Whatever mystery surrounded that insignia would have to wait. Right now he had a life to save. He quickly assessed her injuries. A bullet had entered just below her left shoulder blade and exited through her collarbone. The angle suggested it had missed her heart by inches, but there was significant blood loss and possible damage to major vessels. Her pulse was weak but present. As he worked to stop the bleeding, applying pressure dressings and preparing an IV line, Marcus couldn't shake the image of that insignia from his mind. He had memorized every detail of his mother's uniform in that photograph, had stared at it countless times during the lonely years after her death. He knew he wasn't mistaken. The wounded Marine's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and filled with pain. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. Marcus leaned closer, his ear near her lips. "Tell them. I found him," she whispered so quietly he almost missed it. "Tell them, Marcus. I found Marcus Rivera." The words hit him like a physical blow. His hands trembled as he continued working on her wounds. How could she possibly know his name? He wasn't wearing a name tape, and they had never met before. The other Marines in his unit called him Doc, not Marcus. As he worked to stabilize her condition, more questions flooded his mind. Who was this woman? Why was she wearing his mother's insignia? And how in the world did she know who he was? The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, and Marcus knew the medical evacuation was minutes away. He had managed to stop most of the bleeding, and her vital signs were stabilizing. She would make it to the field hospital, but whether she would survive surgery was another question entirely. As the medic helicopter landed in a swirl of dust and debris, Marcus helped load her onto a stretcher. Just before they lifted her into the aircraft, her eyes opened again, and this time they were clear and focused. She reached out with her uninjured arm and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "The box," she whispered urgently. "Find the box. She wanted you to have it." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the helicopter was lifting off, carrying her away into the desert sky. He stood there for a long moment, watching until it disappeared from view, his mind reeling with confusion and questions that seemed to have no answers. That night, back at the forward operating base, Marcus lay on his narrow cot staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. The image of that insignia kept floating through his thoughts, along with the mysterious woman's words about finding him in some box his mother had wanted him to have. He pulled out his phone and looked at the digital copy of his mother's photograph that he kept saved there. There it was, clear as day. The same 3 silver stars and anchor that he had seen on the wounded Marine's uniform. But his mother had been dead for 12 years. How could her insignia end up on a stranger's uniform in the middle of Afghanistan? Marcus had always believed he knew everything there was to know about his mother's death. The official report had been straightforward. Mechanical failure, helicopter crash, no survivors. But now, lying in the darkness of a war zone thousands of miles from home, he began to wonder if there were parts of his mother's story that had never been told. 3 days passed before Marcus heard anything about the wounded Marine. The forward operating base was a constant buzz of activity, with helicopters coming and going, supply convoys arriving, and patrols heading out into the dangerous terrain beyond the wire. But despite his attempts to find information through official channels, nobody seemed to know anything about the woman he had treated. It wasn't until he was having lunch with his team leader, Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, that he finally got some answers. Jake was a 15-year veteran who had connections throughout the military network in Afghanistan, and Marcus had asked him to make some discreet inquiries. "Found out about your mystery patient," Jake said quietly as he sat down across from Marcus in the mess tent. "Turns out she's not exactly who her uniform suggested she was." Marcus set down his fork and leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Her name is Elena Vasquez. She's not active-duty military. She's a civilian contractor, works for the Defense Department doing classified research. The Marine uniform was just cover for her mission out here." "What kind of research?" Marcus asked, though he suspected Jake wouldn't have those details. "That's where it gets interesting," Jake said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "According to my contact at Bagram, she's been investigating old classified operations from the 1990s and early 2000s, something to do with missing personnel files and unresolved incidents." Marcus felt his heart start to race. His mother had died in 2011, which would fall right into that time frame. "Did your contact mention anything specific?" Jake shook his head. "That's all I could get. But there's more. She's been asking questions about you specifically, not just since she got here, but apparently she's been trying to locate you for months. Your name was on a list she was carrying." The mess tent suddenly felt too small and too loud. Marcus needed air, needed space to think. He excused himself and walked outside into the scorching afternoon heat. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but he barely noticed the landscape. His mind was spinning with the implications of what Jake had just told him. Someone had been looking for him. Someone who wore his mother's insignia and spoke about finding him as if it were a mission she had been given. Someone who mentioned a box that his mother had wanted him to have. That evening, Marcus made a decision that would have gotten him in serious trouble if his commanding officer had found out. He accessed the medical records database and looked up Elena Vasquez's treatment file from the field hospital. What he found there only deepened the mystery. According to her file, Elena was 34 years old, born in Phoenix, Arizona. She had a master's degree in military history from Georgetown University and had been working as a researcher for the Defense Department for 8 years. But there were gaps in her background that seemed deliberate, sections that had been redacted or were marked as classified. More intriguingly, her emergency contact was not a family member or spouse, but a law firm in Washington, D.C. The same law firm, Marcus realized with a shock, that had handled his mother's estate after her death. Marcus had been too young to understand most of the legal proceedings back then. His father had been overwhelmed with grief and had let the lawyers handle everything. But he remembered visiting their offices once, remembered the serious-faced woman in an expensive suit who had explained that his mother had left him a small inheritance that would be held in trust until he turned 25. That birthday was still 2 years away, but now Marcus wondered what else might be waiting for him in that trust. What if the inheritance was more than just money? What if there were documents or personal effects or information about his mother's work that he had never been told about? The next morning brought news that Elena had been transferred to a military hospital in Germany. She was stable but still unconscious from her injuries. Marcus found himself checking her status obsessively, hoping for updates about her condition. It was during one of these checks that he noticed something in her personal effects list that made him stop breathing for a moment. Among the items that had been collected from her gear was a small wooden box, described in the inventory as personal effects, locked, contents unknown. Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. A box. She had mentioned a box before the helicopter took her away. She had said his mother wanted him to have it. That afternoon, Marcus made another decision that could have ended his military career. He called the law firm in Washington using a secure satellite phone, claiming to be following up on his mother's estate. The receptionist transferred him to a senior partner named Margaret Chen, who seemed to have been expecting his call. "Mr. Rivera," she said in a crisp, professional voice, "I wondered when we might hear from you. I assume this is about the Vasquez matter?" Marcus was so surprised that she knew about Elena that he almost hung up. Instead, he managed to say, "I'm not sure what you mean. Ms. Vasquez has been working on behalf of your mother's estate for the past year," Margaret explained. "There were some irregularities in the original investigation of your mother's death, and certain documents came to light that suggested the official report was incomplete." "What kind of irregularities?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that require clearance levels higher than what most people have," Margaret said carefully. "But I can tell you this much. Your mother was involved in operations that were classified far above her apparent rank. The helicopter crash that killed her may not have been an accident." The phone felt heavy in Marcus's hand. Everything he thought he knew about his mother's death was crumbling around him. What was she really doing? That's what Ms. Vasquez was trying to determine. She had been following leads that suggested your mother was part of a special operations unit that officially never existed, the kind of unit that carries out missions that can never be acknowledged. Marcus thought about the insignia again, about how it hadn't made sense on a Marine uniform. Maybe it had never been an official Navy rank insignia at all. Maybe it had been something else entirely, a symbol that only a few people would recognize. "Ms. Vasquez mentioned a box," Marcus said finally. "Yes," Margaret replied. "Your mother left specific instructions that if anything happened to her, you were to receive a locked box containing documents and personal items. But the box went missing after the crash. Ms. Vasquez believed she had found it." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process everything he was hearing. His mother, who he had remembered as a dedicated but relatively low-ranking Navy officer, had apparently been involved in operations so secret that her death had been covered up. And now, 12 years later, someone had been trying to uncover the truth. "Where is Elena now?" he asked. "She's being transferred to a secure medical facility," Margaret said. "Her condition is improving, but given the sensitive nature of her work, access to her is restricted." After the call ended, Marcus sat alone in his quarters for hours, staring at his mother's photograph. He had always thought she looked sad in that picture, but now he wondered if what he had interpreted as sadness was actually something else. Fear, maybe, or the weight of secrets she could never share. That night, as mortars exploded in the distance and the base's defensive systems came to life, Marcus made a promise to himself. When his deployment ended, he was going to find out the truth about his mother's death no matter what it cost him. And he was going to find that box. 2 weeks later, Marcus received news that changed everything. Elena Vasquez had awakened from her coma and was asking to speak with him specifically. The request had come through official military channels, which meant someone very high up in the chain of command was involved in whatever Elena had been investigating. Chief Morrison delivered the message personally, along with orders that Marcus was to be granted emergency leave to travel to the military hospital in Germany, where Elena was recovering. The speed with which everything was arranged told Marcus that this was not a routine medical follow-up visit. The flight from Afghanistan to Germany gave Marcus 18 hours to think about what he might learn when he finally got to speak with Elena face-to-face. He had spent the past 2 weeks researching everything he could find about his mother's service record, but most of the detailed information remained classified above his security clearance level. What he had discovered was troubling enough. His mother's official assignments didn't match up with the locations where she had actually been deployed. There were months-long gaps in her service record that were unexplained. And most significantly, the helicopter she had died in was not supposed to have been where it crashed according to any official mission reports. The military hospital in Germany was nothing like the field hospitals Marcus was used to. This was a state-of-the-art facility, with advanced medical equipment and enough security to suggest that some of its patients were involved in highly sensitive operations. Marcus had to pass through 3 separate security checkpoints before he was allowed to see Elena. He found her in a private room on the 4th floor, hooked up to various monitors but alert, and sitting up in bed. She was younger than he had expected, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his appearance as he entered the room. "Marcus," she said simply, as if they had known each other for years. "I wasn't sure you would come." "I'm not sure why I did," Marcus admitted, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "But I need answers. About my mother. About that insignia you were wearing. About the box you mentioned." Elena studied his face for a long moment before speaking. "Your mother was my mentor," she said quietly. "Not officially, of course. Officially, we never met. But she saved my life once, and in doing so, she trusted me with information that was never supposed to exist." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of information?" "The kind that could end careers and destroy reputations if it ever became public," Elena said. "Your mother was part of a joint military unit that conducted operations in places where the United States was never officially present. They called themselves the Silent Service, and they wore that insignia as a way of identifying each other." She pointed to a small bag on the bedside table. "The insignia you saw was hers. She gave it to me 6 months before she died, along with instructions about what to do if anything happened to her." Marcus opened the bag and carefully removed the small piece of fabric. Up close, he could see that it wasn't standard military issue. The silver threads were hand-sewn, and there was a small number embroidered on the back, 847. "What's the number for?" he asked. "Each member of the Silent Service had a number instead of using their real names on missions," Elena explained. "Your mother was 847. There were never more than 50 active members at any given time, and most of them are dead now." The weight of what Elena was telling him began to sink in. His mother had been living a double life, carrying out dangerous missions while maintaining the cover of a regular Navy officer. And she had died because of it. "Tell me about the crash," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's expression grew somber. "It wasn't mechanical failure, like the official report claimed. Your mother's helicopter was shot down by hostile forces while she was extracting a high-value target from enemy territory. The mission was so classified that they couldn't acknowledge what really happened without revealing the existence of the Silent Service." Marcus felt anger building in his chest. "So they just let everyone believe it was an accident? They let my father and me grieve for someone who died a hero, but they never told us the truth?" "The truth would have put you in danger," Elena said gently. "The people your mother was fighting don't just go away when an operation ends. Some of them are still out there, still looking for revenge against anyone connected to the Silent Service." She reached for another item in the bedside bag and pulled out a photograph. It showed a group of military personnel in non-standard uniforms, their faces serious and determined. Marcus recognized his mother immediately, standing in the back row with the same sad expression he remembered from her official portrait. "This was taken 3 months before she died," Elena said. "It's the only photograph of the Silent Service that still exists. Everyone else in this picture is dead except for 2 people. Marcus studied the faces in the photograph, trying to memorize each one. These were the people who had known his mother as she really was, who had fought alongside her in battles that officially never happened. "Who are the 2 survivors?" "One of them is me," Elena said. "The other is a man named David Park. He was your mother's commanding officer, and he's the one who sent me to find you." The room fell silent as Marcus absorbed this information. After 12 years of believing he was alone in the world except for his father, he was learning that there were people who had known his mother better than he ever had. "Why now?" Marcus asked finally. "Why wait 12 years to tell me the truth?" "Because we didn't have the box," Elena said simply. "Your mother left specific instructions that you were not to learn about any of this until you had received the contents of a locked box that she hid before her final mission. We've been searching for it ever since she died." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "And you found it?" Elena nodded. 3 months ago, in a storage facility in Virginia, your mother had rented the unit under an assumed name and had paid the rent 20 years in advance. Inside was the box, along with documents and recordings that she wanted you to have. She gestured toward a secure briefcase that Marcus hadn't noticed when he entered the room. It's all there. Everything she wanted you to know about who she really was, about the missions she carried out, about why she chose the life she led. Marcus stared at the briefcase, knowing that opening it would change everything. Once he learned the truth about his mother, there would be no going back to the simple story of a Navy officer who died in an accident. There would only be the complex reality of a woman who had sacrificed everything, including her relationship with her family, to protect her country. There's something else, Elena said softly. The people who killed your mother are still active. David Park believes they're getting close to identifying other members of the Silent Service, including family members. Opening that box might put you in danger. Marcus looked at Elena, then at the briefcase, then back at his mother's photograph. He thought about the past 12 years, about growing up without knowing who his mother really was, about the questions that had haunted him through his own military service. She was a hero, he said finally. Whatever she did, whatever dangers she faced, she did it to protect people. I need to know the truth, regardless of the consequences. Elena smiled for the first time since he had entered the room. That's exactly what she said you would say. She knew you better than you think, Marcus. Everything she did was for you. Marcus reached for the briefcase, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to discover. As he prepared to unlock the secrets his mother had died protecting, he realized that his journey was just beginning. The truth about Sarah Rivera's life was about to change her son's life forever. The briefcase opened with a soft click, revealing contents that would have seemed ordinary to anyone else but struck Marcus like a physical blow. On top was a sealed envelope with his name written in his mother's handwriting, the familiar curves and loops he remembered from birthday cards and school notes from years past. Beneath the letter were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be several small recording devices. Elena watched silently as Marcus lifted the envelope with trembling hands. Read the letter first, she suggested gently. Everything else will make more sense after that. Marcus carefully opened the envelope and unfolded 3 pages of handwritten text. His mother's voice seemed to speak directly to him through the carefully chosen words. The letter began with an apology. Sarah Rivera had known that her double life meant lying to the people she loved most, and she had carried that guilt with her every day. But she explained that the work of the Silent Service was too important to abandon, even for her family. She wrote about missions in countries that most people had never heard of, about preventing terrorist attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent civilians, about rescuing hostages from situations where official military intervention was impossible. The Silent Service operated in the shadows, doing the work that kept the world safer but could never be acknowledged publicly. Most importantly, she wrote about Marcus himself. She had joined the Silent Service before he was born, but becoming a mother had changed her perspective on the work. Every mission became personal, because she was fighting to protect the world her son would inherit. I know you will have questions about why I chose this life. The letter continued in her familiar handwriting. I know you will wonder if I loved this work more than I loved you and your father. The truth is that this work became an extension of my love for you. Every life I saved, every attack I helped prevent, every mission I completed successfully was a gift I was giving to your future. Marcus had to stop reading several times to wipe tears from his eyes. Elena sat quietly, giving him the space he needed to process his mother's words. The letter went on to explain that she had always planned to retire from the Silent Service when Marcus turned 18, but circumstances had changed. A terrorist cell had acquired weapons that could kill millions of people, and she was the only operative with the necessary contacts to locate and neutralize the threat. I am writing this letter before what will likely be my final mission, she had written. If you are reading this, it means I did not survive, but it also means that David Park and the others were successful in completing our work. The weapons have been destroyed, and the threat has been eliminated. She had been right about not surviving, but Marcus now understood that her death had prevented something much worse from happening. His mother hadn't just died in service to her country. She had died protecting the entire world from a catastrophic attack. The letter concluded with instructions for Marcus. If he chose to learn more about her work, he would find detailed mission reports and recordings in the briefcase. If he decided that the knowledge was too dangerous or too painful, He could destroy everything without reading further, and no one would think less of him for that choice. Whatever you decide, the letter ended, know that you are the most important thing in my life. Every choice I made was guided by my love for you. I hope someday you will understand that the mother who read you bedtime stories and helped you with your homework was the same woman who fought in places that don't appear on maps. Both versions of me were real, and both versions of me loved you more than words can express. Marcus set the letter aside and looked at Elena through eyes blurred with tears. How long have you known about all this? I was recruited into the silent service 6 months before your mother died, Elena said. She was supposed to be my training officer, but the mission came up before we could work together. She gave me this briefcase and told me to find you if anything happened to her. Marcus picked up one of the recording devices and turned it over in his hands. What's on these? Mission debriefings mostly. Your mother was very thorough about documenting everything. She said it was important to keep records in case anyone ever questioned whether the silent service had been necessary. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus listened to his mother's voice describing operations that sounded like something from a movie. She had infiltrated terrorist training camps, rescued kidnapped diplomats, and prevented the assassination of world leaders. Her voice was calm and professional as she described events that would have terrified most people. But it was the personal recordings that affected Marcus the most. His mother had made these during quiet moments between missions, speaking directly to him as if he were sitting in the room with her. In one recording, made just 2 weeks before her death, she talked about watching the sunrise from a safe house in Eastern Europe and thinking about the morning routine they used to share when Marcus was younger. She would wake him up for school by opening his bedroom curtains and describing what the weather looked like outside. I know you probably don't remember those mornings, her voice said through the small speaker, but they were some of the happiest moments of my life. No matter how dangerous the work became, I could always find peace in the memory of making breakfast for you and listening to you talk about your plans for the day. Another recording, made during what sounded like a long vehicle journey, was addressed to Marcus on his future wedding day. She spoke about the qualities she hoped he would look for in a partner and the kind of father she believed he would become. She had somehow known, even while living such a dangerous life, that Marcus would grow up to be a good man. As he listened to these intimate messages, Marcus began to understand that his mother's secret life hadn't made her a different person. It had simply been another way of expressing the same protective instincts that had made her such a devoted parent. Elena had been quiet for most of the afternoon, but as Marcus finished listening to the final recording, she spoke up. There's one more thing you need to know. Your mother's final mission wasn't just successful. It was legendary within the intelligence community. The weapons she helped recover would have been used to attack major cities around the world. She saved millions of lives. Marcus looked at the scattered contents of the briefcase, trying to reconcile these revelations with his childhood memories. Why are you telling me all this now? Why not just let me continue believing the official story? Because the people who killed her are still active, Elena said seriously. David Park believes they're planning something new, something that could be even more devastating than what your mother stopped 12 years ago. He thinks they might try to target the families of silent service members as a way of sending a message. The implications of what she was saying began to dawn on Marcus. You're saying I might be in danger because of who my mother was? We're saying you might be the key to stopping them, Elena corrected. Your mother left more than just personal messages in that briefcase. She also left intelligence about the terrorist network that killed her, including information that we've never been able to verify or act upon. Elena reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder that Marcus hadn't noticed before. These are the details of the network she was investigating when she died. Names, locations, financial connections, operational methods. She had been gathering this intelligence for years, but she never had the chance to share it with anyone before her final mission. Marcus opened the folder and saw pages of detailed notes in his mother's handwriting, along with photographs, maps, and what appeared to be communication intercepts. It was like looking at the workspace of a master detective who had been building a case that could change the world. David Park believes this information could lead us to the current leadership of the network, Elena continued. But we need someone they won't suspect, someone who has legitimate reasons to be asking questions about Sarah Rivera's death. Marcus looked up from the folder, understanding what Elena was suggesting. You want me to help you find the people who killed my mother? We want to give you the choice, Elena said carefully. You could walk away from all of this and live a normal life. Or you could help us finish what your mother started. But if you choose to get involved, there's no guarantee of safety. These people have killed before, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Marcus thought about his mother's letter, about her explanation that every mission had been motivated by her desire to protect his future. Now he had the opportunity to continue that work, to ensure that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. He looked at the insignia she had worn, the photographs of her fallen comrades, and the detailed intelligence that represented years of dangerous work. Everything his mother had been was contained in this briefcase, and now it was his responsibility to decide what to do with it. If I help you, Marcus said finally, what exactly would that involve? Elena smiled, and Marcus could see approval in her eyes. It would mean becoming part of something bigger than yourself, just like your mother did. It would mean taking risks to protect people who will never know your name, and it would mean carrying on a legacy that began long before you were born. Marcus closed the folder and looked at his mother's photograph one more time. He thought about the bedtime stories she used to read to him, about the way she used to check under his bed for monsters before kissing him goodnight. Now he understood that she had spent her entire adult life fighting real monsters, the kind that threatened everyone's children. Tell me what I need to do, he said. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital in Germany, Marcus found himself in a coffee shop in downtown Washington, D.C., waiting to meet David Park for the first time. Elena had been discharged 2 days earlier and had spent hours briefing Marcus on what to expect from his mother's former commanding officer. David Park was not what Marcus had imagined. The man who approached his table was in his early 50s, wearing a simple business suit and carrying a newspaper under his arm. He could have been any government employee heading home after a long day at the office. Only his eyes gave away the fact that he had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Marcus Rivera, David said, extending his hand as he sat down. You look just like your mother did when she was your age. They sat in silence for a moment, sizing each other up. Marcus had prepared dozens of questions during the flight from Germany. But now that he was face to face with someone who had known his mother as a warrior, rather than just a parent, he found it difficult to know where to begin. Elena tells me you're ready to help us finish what Sarah started, David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. I want you to understand what that means before you commit to anything. Over the next hour, David painted a picture of the terrorist network that had killed Marcus's mother. It was unlike the organizations that made headlines in the news. This group was more sophisticated, more patient, and more dangerous than anything law enforcement agencies were equipped to handle through normal channels. They called themselves the Eternal Dawn, and they had been operating for more than 20 years. Their goal wasn't just to commit terrorist attacks. It was to fundamentally destabilize the global order by targeting the infrastructure that kept modern civilization functioning. They don't want to kill thousands of people in a single spectacular attack, David explained. They want to kill millions of people slowly by destroying the systems that provide clean water, reliable electricity, and safe food distribution. They want to send humanity back to the Dark Ages. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand the scope of what his mother had been fighting. How close did she get to stopping them? Closer than anyone before or since, David said. The weapons she helped recover 12 years ago were just one part of a larger plan. We stopped that attack, but the Eternal Dawn regrouped and adapted. They're more careful now, more secretive. David opened a manila folder and showed Marcus surveillance photographs of 3 individuals, 2 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s, all with the kind of unremarkable appearance that would allow them to blend in anywhere. These are the current operational commanders, David said. The man on the left is known as the engineer. He designs their attacks and manages their technical capabilities. The woman in the middle is called the banker. She manages their finances and recruitment. The man on the right is the ghost. He handles their security and counterintelligence operations. Marcus studied the photographs, trying to memorize their faces. Do we know their real names? We have suspicions, but nothing confirmed, David said. That's where your mother's intelligence becomes crucial. She had identified patterns in their operations that we've never been able to verify. Financial transactions, communication methods, safe house locations, information that could help us track them down. David closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. But here's the problem. Every time we've tried to follow up on your mother's leads, we've hit dead ends. It's as if someone has been one step ahead of us, cleaning up evidence before we can find it. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. You think there's a leak in your organization? We think the Eternal Dawn has someone inside the government who's been feeding them information about our investigations, David said grimly. Someone with high-level security clearance who knows about the silent service. The coffee shop suddenly felt too public, too exposed. Marcus glanced around at the other customers, wondering if any of them might be listening to their conversation. If that's true, then how do you know you can trust me? David smiled for the first time since sitting down. Because your mother anticipated this possibility. She designed her intelligence collection in a way that would be useless to anyone except you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like an ordinary smartphone. This device contains encrypted files that can only be opened using biometric data that matches yours. Fingerprints, retinal scans, voice patterns. Your mother somehow obtained samples of all of these when you were a child. Marcus stared at the phone, amazed once again by his mother's foresight and attention to detail. Even in death, she had found a way to protect him and ensure that her work could only be completed by someone she trusted completely. The files on this phone contain the real names and current locations of at least a dozen Eternal Dawn operatives, David continued. But more importantly, they contain evidence of the mole within our own organization. Your mother was close to identifying them when she was killed. Marcus took the phone, feeling its weight in his palm. Such a simple device, but it contained information that could change the balance of power in a shadow war that most people didn't even know was being fought. What do you need me to do? He asked. We need you to access those files and help us verify the intelligence your mother gathered, David said. But we also need you to be our insurance policy. If the mole discovers what we're doing and tries to stop us, you'll be the only person who can continue the mission. Over the next several days, Marcus found himself living a double life that reminded him uncomfortably of his mother's situation. During the day, he completed his military duties and prepared for his return to Afghanistan. During the evenings, he worked with Elena and David to decode his mother's encrypted files. The process was more complex than simply unlocking a phone. His mother had created multiple layers of security that required different combinations of biometric data and personal information that only Marcus would know. Questions about his childhood memories, details about family traditions, even the names of pets they had owned years earlier. As each layer of encryption fell away, Marcus gained a deeper appreciation for his mother's intelligence and dedication. She had been building a comprehensive map of the Eternal Dawn's operations for years, tracking financial transactions across dozens of countries, identifying patterns in their communications, and documenting the connections between seemingly unrelated attacks around the world. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its scope. The Eternal Dawn wasn't just planning another terrorist attack. They were preparing to launch simultaneous strikes against critical infrastructure in multiple countries. Water treatment plants, electrical grids, communication networks, and food distribution systems would all be targeted at the same time. They're calling it the Dark Winter, Elena explained as they reviewed the intelligence late one evening in a secure facility outside the city. The idea is to create cascading failures that would take months or years to repair. Millions of people would die, and the survivors would be left without the technology and systems that make modern life possible. Marcus studied the detailed plans that his mother had somehow obtained. The level of coordination required was staggering, involving hundreds of operatives positioned around the globe. When are they planning to execute this? David looked up from his computer screen, his expression grim. According to your mother's files, they were originally planning to launch the Dark Winter 12 years ago. Her final mission disrupted their timeline, but they've been rebuilding their capabilities ever since. He pulled up a calendar on his laptop and pointed to a date that was less than 6 months away. We believe they're planning to launch the attack on the anniversary of your mother's death. It would be their way of completing what she died trying to prevent. The symbolism wasn't lost on Marcus. His mother had given her life to stop the Dark Winter, and now the terrorists were planning to honor the anniversary of her death by finally carrying out their plan. Unless somehow he could finish what she had started. There's something else, Elena said quietly. She had been unusually subdued during the evening's briefing, and Marcus could see concern in her eyes. We think the Eternal Dawn knows about you. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What do you mean? There have been inquiries, David explained. Someone has been asking questions about your military service, your deployment schedule, your family background. Professional inquiries, the kind that would come from someone with legitimate access to military databases. The implications hit Marcus immediately. If the Eternal Dawn knew who he was, then his father was also in danger. His friends, his fellow servicemen, anyone connected to his life could become a target. "We've arranged for discreet protection for your father," David said quickly, seeing the panic in Marcus's eyes. "He doesn't know about any of this, and we want to keep it that way." "As far as he's concerned, you're just completing a routine deployment." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. The simple life he had known was disappearing, replaced by the same dangerous world his mother had inhabited. But unlike her, he didn't have years of training and experience to rely on. He was a medic, not a spy. "I don't know if I can do this," he said honestly. "I'm not my mother. I don't have her skills or her experience." Elena reached across the table and touched his hand. "You have something she didn't have when she started. You have the complete picture of what we're fighting." She had to piece together fragments of intelligence over years of dangerous missions. "You're starting with everything she learned." David nodded in agreement. "Your mother spent her career fighting individual battles in a war she could only partially understand. You have the opportunity to end the war itself." Marcus looked at the intelligence files spread across the table, at the photographs of terrorist operatives, at the detailed plans for attacks that would kill millions of innocent people. Somewhere in all of this information was the key to stopping the Dark Winter. But finding it would require him to step fully into his mother's shadow world. He thought about the letter she had written to him, about her explanation that every choice she made had been guided by her love for him. Now he faced the same kind of choice. Continue living a normal life while knowing that catastrophe was approaching, or risk everything to prevent it. "If we do this," Marcus said finally, "if we try to stop the Dark Winter, what are our chances of success?" David and Elena exchanged a look before David answered. "Your mother believed it could be done. She died believing that the intelligence she had gathered would be enough to destroy the Eternal Dawn permanently. Whether she was right or not, we're about to find out." Marcus picked up his mother's insignia, the small piece of fabric that had started this entire journey. The 3 silver stars seemed to catch the light in the room, and for a moment he could almost imagine his mother standing beside him, encouraging him to be brave. "Then let's finish what she started," he said. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later at 2 in the morning, when Marcus was alone in the secure facility, reviewing his mother's files for what felt like the 100th time. He had been cross-referencing financial transactions with communication intercepts when he noticed a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. His mother had identified a series of payments from a shell company in Cyprus to various accounts around the world. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering banking regulations, but they occurred on very specific dates that corresponded to successful terrorist attacks over the past decade. What made this discovery significant was that the payments continued after his mother's death, following the same pattern but funding operations that were smaller in scope than what the Eternal Dawn had attempted before. It was as if the organization was rebuilding its capabilities systematically, preparing for something much larger. Marcus called David and Elena immediately, despite the early hour. Within an hour they were both at the facility, studying the financial records with the intensity of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. "This is it," David said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the funding mechanism your mother identified. If we can trace these payments back to their source, we can identify the banker." Elena was already working on her laptop, accessing financial databases that Marcus didn't know existed. "The shell company in Cyprus is registered to a law firm in London," she said. "But the law firm is owned by another shell company in Switzerland, which is owned by a trust in the Cayman Islands." "Money laundering 101, David muttered. "They've created so many layers of legal entities that it would take years to unravel through normal channels." Marcus studied the dates of the payments more carefully. There was something familiar about the timing, something that nagged at the back of his mind. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen. "The payments aren't random. They're made on the same day every month, but the day changes each year." Elena looked at the pattern he had identified. "It's a calendar system. The payments are made on the anniversary of specific events." David leaned over to examine the dates more closely. September 11th, March 11th, July 7th. These are all dates of major terrorist attacks. They're using the anniversaries as a scheduling system. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. My mother's death anniversary is in 6 weeks. If they're planning to launch the Dark Winter on that date, then the final payment should be made soon. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard as she searched for recent transactions. There, she said, pointing to an entry that had appeared just hours earlier. $5 million transferred from the Cyprus account to a bank in Prague. David was already reaching for his secure phone. Prague is where the ghost was last spotted. If they're moving that much money to his location, it means they're in the final preparation phase. Over the next 48 hours, the small team worked around the clock to trace the money transfer. Using contacts in European intelligence agencies, they were able to identify the Prague bank account and the individual who had access to it. The account belonged to a man named Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian military officer who had been operating in Eastern Europe for the past 5 years. According to intelligence files, he matched the physical description of the ghost and had been present in several cities where Eternal Dawn operations had been conducted. This is our chance, David said as they reviewed surveillance footage from the Prague bank. If we can get to Kozlov before he disappears again, we might be able to stop the Dark Winter. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror. After weeks of studying files and analyzing data, they were finally taking action. But the stakes couldn't be higher, and he knew that any mistake could cost millions of lives. What's the plan? He asked. David spread out a map of Prague on the table. Kozlov is staying at a hotel in the old city. Czech intelligence has been watching him, but they don't know about his connection to the Eternal Dawn. We need to get him alone and convince him to give us the information we need. Elena looked up from her laptop. There's a problem. Czech authorities just lost surveillance on Kozlov. He checked out of his hotel this morning and hasn't been seen since. The room fell silent as the implications of this development sank in. Without Kozlov, they had no direct link to the current operations of the Eternal Dawn. The ghost had lived up to his name and vanished just as they were getting close to him. We need to think like your mother, David said finally. She always had backup plans. If Kozlov has disappeared, there must be another way to track him. Marcus returned to his mother's files, searching for any reference to Prague or to Russian operatives working with the Eternal Dawn. It was Elena who found the connection, buried in a communication intercept from 8 years earlier. Your mother identified a safe house in Prague that the Eternal Dawn was using for meetings, she said. It's registered to a company that doesn't exist anymore, but the property records show it's still vacant. David studied the address. It's worth investigating. If Kozlov is still in Prague, he might be using the same safe house network that his organization has relied on for years. The decision to travel to Prague was made quickly, but the logistics were complex. Marcus would have to request emergency leave from his military unit, and David would have to coordinate with Czech authorities without revealing the full scope of their mission. 24 hours later, Marcus found himself walking through the narrow streets of Prague's old city, trying to look like a tourist while actually conducting reconnaissance on a building that might contain one of the world's most dangerous terrorists. The safe house was a 3-story building squeezed between a bookstore and a restaurant, with windows that had been covered by heavy curtains. There were no obvious signs of occupation, but Marcus noticed fresh tire tracks in the alley behind the building. Elena, who had positioned herself at a cafe across the street, confirmed that someone had entered the building through the rear entrance just an hour earlier. David, monitoring communications from a rented apartment nearby, had detected encrypted radio transmissions coming from the area. We need to move tonight, David said during their evening briefing. Czech police are planning a sweep of the neighborhood tomorrow as part of an unrelated investigation. If Kozlov is in there, he'll be gone by morning. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he realized what David was suggesting. After weeks of research and preparation, they were about to attempt a direct confrontation with a member of the Eternal Dawn. What if he's not alone? Marcus asked. What if there are other operatives in the building? Then we improvise, David said simply. Your mother spent her career walking into situations where she was outnumbered and outgunned. Sometimes the only advantage you have is surprise and determination. As darkness fell over Prague, Marcus found himself thinking about all the events that had led to this moment. 6 weeks earlier, he had been a Navy SEAL medic with no knowledge of his mother's secret life. Now he was about to attempt a mission that could prevent a global catastrophe. He touched the insignia in his pocket, the small piece of fabric that had started his journey into his mother's world. Whatever happened in the next few hours, he would be carrying her memory and her dedication with him. "Are you ready for this?" Elena asked as they prepared their equipment for the mission. Marcus thought about his mother's letter, about her explanation that every choice she had made was guided by her love for him. He thought about the millions of innocent people who would die if the Dark Winter succeeded. He thought about the 12 years he had spent not knowing who his mother really was, and the opportunity he now had to complete her most important mission. "I'm ready," he said, and he meant it. The safe house stood silent and dark across the street, holding secrets that could change the world. In a few hours, Marcus would know whether his mother's sacrifice had been enough to save the people she had died trying to protect. The final phase of Sarah Rivera's mission was about to begin, and her son would be the one to see it through to the end. At precisely midnight, Marcus crept through the alley behind the safe house, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain it could be heard by anyone nearby. David had disabled the building's alarm system using equipment that would have impressed even the most skilled burglar, while Elena maintained watch from her position across the street. The rear door yielded to David's lockpicks after several tense minutes. Marcus followed him into a darkened hallway that smelled of cigarettes and something else he couldn't identify. Old fear, perhaps, or the lingering presence of people who lived constantly on the edge of violence. They moved through the building methodically, David leading with his weapon drawn while Marcus stayed close behind. The first floor appeared to be empty, containing only basic furniture and outdated electronics. But on the second floor they found evidence of recent occupation, food containers, newspapers dated from that morning, and most significantly, a laptop computer that was still warm to the touch. David gestured for Marcus to stay back while he checked the remaining rooms. They found Kozlov on the third floor, sitting calmly at a small table as if he had been expecting their arrival. He was younger than Marcus had anticipated, perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that would allow him to blend into any crowd. "You must be Marcus Rivera," Kozlov said in accented English, not bothering to turn around as they entered the room. "I have been wondering when you would find me." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The ghost not only knew who he was but had been anticipating his arrival. Everything they had assumed about having the element of surprise was wrong. "You're not surprised to see us," David said, keeping his weapon trained on Kozlov while scanning the room for threats. "Surprised? No." Kozlov finally turned to face them, revealing tired eyes and a sad smile. "Relieved, perhaps. I have been carrying a burden for 12 years that I am finally ready to put down." Marcus stepped forward, despite David's restraining gesture. "What burden?" Kozlov studied Marcus's face for a long moment. "You look like her, you know. Your mother." She had the same determined expression when she realized what I was going to do. The room seemed to spin around Marcus as he processed what Kozlov had just said. "You knew my mother?" "I killed your mother," Kozlov said simply. "I was the one who shot down her helicopter." Marcus lunged forward, but David caught his arm and held him back. Every instinct in his body was screaming for revenge, but the rational part of his mind recognized that they needed information more than they needed justice. "But I was not working for the Eternal Dawn when I did it," Kozlov continued, seemingly unaffected by Marcus's reaction. "I was working for your government." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's impossible." Kozlov reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a worn manila folder. "Your mother discovered that there was a mole in the Silent Service, someone who had been feeding information to the Eternal Dawn for years. But she made a mistake. She assumed the mole was working voluntarily." He opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Marcus could see official letterhead and what appeared to be classified communications. "The mole was me," Kozlov said, "but I was not betraying your country by choice. The Eternal Dawn had kidnapped my daughter and threatened to kill her unless I provided them with intelligence about Silent Service operations." David moved closer to examine the documents, keeping his weapon ready, but allowing Kozlov to continue his explanation. "For 3 years, I fed them information that helped them stay one step ahead of your operations. I told myself that I was protecting my child, that surely someone else would stop the Eternal Dawn before they could use what I gave them." Kozlov's voice broke slightly as he continued. But then your mother figured out what I was doing. She came to me privately and offered to help rescue my daughter in exchange for information about the Eternal Dawn's plans. Marcus felt his anger being replaced by confusion. Then why did you kill her? Because I was ordered to, Kozlov said, tears forming in his eyes. My government handlers told me that your mother had become too dangerous, that she was close to exposing not just me, but an entire network of compromised operatives. They said that killing her was the only way to protect national security. The room fell silent as Marcus tried to process this revelation. His mother hadn't been killed by terrorists. She had been assassinated by her own government to cover up a counterintelligence failure. I realized too late that I had been manipulated, Kozlov continued. The people who ordered me to kill your mother were not protecting national security. They were protecting themselves. Some of them were working with the Eternal Dawn directly. David lowered his weapon slightly. You're saying there's a conspiracy within the U.S. government? Not a conspiracy, Kozlov corrected. A handful of individuals who became compromised and decided that cooperation with the Eternal Dawn was preferable to exposure. They used people like me to do their dirty work, while maintaining plausible deniability. Marcus found his voice again. What happened to your daughter? Kozlov's expression grew even more pained. She died 6 months after I killed your mother. The Eternal Dawn killed her anyway. Once they no longer needed leverage over me, everything I had done, all the lives I had helped them take, had been for nothing. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus began to understand why Kozlov had been expecting them, why he seemed almost eager to be caught. You want to stop them, Marcus said. That's why you're still working with them. You're trying to find a way to destroy the organization from within. Kozlov nodded. For 12 years I have been gathering intelligence about their operations while pretending to still work for them. I know about the Dark Winter. I know when they plan to launch it. And I know how to stop it. David stepped forward. What do you know? Kozlov pulled out a small digital device and placed it on the table. This contains the complete operational plan for the Dark Winter, including the locations of all planned attacks, the identities of every operative involved, and most importantly, the access codes needed to disable their weapons systems. Marcus stared at the device, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You're willing to give us this information? I am willing to do more than that, Kozlov said. I am willing to help you execute a plan that will not only stop the Dark Winter, but destroy the Eternal Dawn completely. But it will require all of us to take significant risks. Over the next hour, Kozlov outlined a strategy that was both brilliant and terrifying in its scope. The Eternal Dawn was planning to launch their attacks from a central command center, hidden in an abandoned industrial facility outside Berlin. All of their operatives would be present for the launch, making it possible to capture or eliminate the entire leadership in a single operation. But the facility is heavily defended, Kozlov warned, and if we fail to stop the launch sequence, the Dark Winter will proceed automatically. We will have one opportunity to get this right. David studied the intelligence that Kozlov had provided. Why are you trusting us with this? How do we know this isn't another manipulation? Kozlov looked directly at Marcus as he answered. Because 12 years ago, your mother gave me something more valuable than my life. She gave me a chance to do the right thing. I was too much of a coward to take it then, but I will not make that mistake again. Marcus felt the pieces of his mother's story finally clicking into place. She hadn't died just trying to stop a terrorist attack. She had died trying to save a man who was being forced to betray everything he believed in. Even in her final mission, she had been thinking about protecting someone else's child. There's something else, Kozlov said quietly. Your mother's final message, the one she was trying to transmit when I shot down her helicopter, was not about the weapons cache. It was about me. She was trying to tell your people that I was not a willing traitor, that I could be turned into an asset instead of eliminated as a threat. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he finally understood the full scope of his mother's sacrifice. She had died trying to save not just millions of innocent lives, but the life of the man who had been forced to kill her. Will you help us finish what she started? Marcus asked. Kozlov picked up his mother's insignia, which Marcus had placed on the table during their conversation. He studied the 3 silver stars and the small anchor, then handed it back to Marcus with ceremony. "It would be my honor to serve under the command of Sarah Rivera's son," he said. As dawn broke over Prague, Marcus found himself part of a team that his mother could never have imagined. Her son, her protege, her former commanding officer, and the man who had killed her, all working together to complete her final mission. The next phase of their operation would take them to Berlin, where they would attempt to prevent a catastrophe that could reshape the world. But for the first time since this journey began, Marcus felt confident that they would succeed. His mother had always told him that the most important battles were fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. Now he understood that she had been preparing him for this moment his entire life, teaching him through her example that sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to give up when everything seemed hopeless. The dark winter was coming, but Sarah Rivera's son was ready for it. And he would not be fighting alone.